Well, hello again, Neighbourhood Prayer Network family. It's great to be back with you once again and to be able to come and to just share with you conversations that I have with some great Christian leaders. And this conversation is no exception. One of the things that I have the privilege of doing is going into meetings and hearing how different Christian leaders are tackling, reflecting, thinking, praying about all that's going on in our communities, on our streets and in our neighborhoods, and to see how we might be together as one voice. And recently I had the great privilege of being at the Churches Together in England Bodies and Association. You may know that Neighbourhood Prayer Network is a body and association of CTE, which means we get to be able to work with Churches Together in England, but it also means that they've got other bodies and association, and we get to just be able to pool our wisdom and our resources. And it's a great thing that we are privileged to be a part of. But recently they had a keynote speaker come and speak at our Bodies and Association meeting. And that keynote speaker is my guest and my conversational partner for this recording, and it was Gareth Brown. Now, Gareth works with the Cinnamon Network. Many of you may know of the Cinnamon Network, encouraging churches to think about how they do social action in their community. And Gareth works alongside helping and encouraging churches, but also Gareth is very much not just telling people what to do, but he's also very much a practitioner at the coalface, actually practicing what he preaches. And so he is involved in team leading some work up in Smethwick. And so probably Gareth, as well as I say hello to you, I'd love you just to say hello to our NPN family, but also just to introduce yourself a bit more to us.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Yeah, we appreciate that. And hopefully I'm not always telling people what to do. I don't think that, some people wouldn't appreciate me telling them what to do. I do think, one of my key roles is with Cinnamon Network really is to try and work alongside the church to encourage and equip the churches to be involved in serving their communities, loving their communities, caring for their communities. So that's one of my roles. And then my other roles, you said, is working at the coalface. I think, literally sometimes it feels like we're at the coalface, very mucky, very dirty, very hands-on work, but working as a local church leader in Smethwick in the inner city, seeking seeking the shalom of the city, seeking to pray, of course, for the city and the welfare of the city, which is what obviously the prophet Jeremiah calls us to do. And then obviously just prior to that, I've only been in post 9 months as a team leader role. I've been in the church for 20 odd years, but I've just come into the team leader role more recently. But prior to that, working for a church action network. So again, the church is coming together to love their community and to act together and to work together and to be together. So that's called Smethwick Church Action Network, and I was involved in that right up until November last year. So that's a bit about me.
Brilliant. It's always good to know who we're talking to, because you've got some great ideas that you shared at Churches Together in England, but it's also useful for those who haven't heard of you, Gareth, those that don't know you, those of you that don't know of Cinnamon Network, to be able to just to kind of go, that might be the kind of organisation I'd love to go and Google. I encourage you, as you're listening to our conversation, to just go and Google about the Cinnamon Network, but also to go and find out about what Gareth is doing locally as well. But Gareth, we've just had a kind of lockdown period. It feels like restrictions have been eased for over a year, but we're still very much in a kind of COVID pandemic. How was the pandemic for you?
Yeah, I think to be honest, the pandemic was a bit of a whirlwind, like for many. We adapted very, very quickly to it. So we're thinking back to March 2020. I was leading a charity. I was part-time working for a church and part-time working for Cinnamon. So it was quite a busy time. I think in terms of the local charity work, we were running a food bank and a food pantry. And the main thing was obviously to keep that going and to keep it running, particularly when volunteers obviously were unable to volunteer, particularly those over 70 obviously were shielding. And then also seeing the demand shoot up, because even though obviously furlough did come in a bit later, even that, of course, 80% of a low wage is an even lower wage. And we found obviously the need was great, and we needed to respond to that need. So COVID was very much a time of quick responses, felt like a lot of energy. Sometimes I've got to be honest, sometimes that was a bit of adrenaline to keep you going. Other times, we were on our knees, rightfully so. And I'm saying that obviously to the NPM family, we were on our knees needing the fuel of God to help us in the midst of it. So it was a very, quite demanding time. It's a demanding time in my family life as well, because we had issues in our family that meant we had to take on an extra family member. We also had issues around in the church, obviously, in terms of leaders being off, and then we had to come in and do an interim leadership. And yes, so it was a challenging time. It was a time when I think we were sort of, feeling like the energy was there. I think actually what's happened since then is that obviously at that time we felt very equipped. But I think since that time, the problems and challenges have arisen, actually are now greater and longer term. And I think, I remember the day, if you remember right, I think it was at the end of February when there was an announcement that restrictions were going to be lifted. But of course, it was the same day that war in Ukraine started with the Russian invasion. And then, and then obviously now seeing the cost of living crisis and seeing this is something that I think is going to last a lot longer. It's not going to be solved by a vaccine. So I think in terms of, as a church, we've always responded to crisis. We've always responded to emergency, but it feels like COVID was perhaps a short, sharp emergency. And even though obviously the effects of that are still going on, but this is now going into a period of time where I think we need to think much more longer term. So I think, COVID was an exhausting time, to be honest, and a time when we adapted, a time when we really came to the fore as local churches. But at the same time, I think now it's like take a breath and think, actually, what do we need to do in the longer term?
I was going to come back to pick up on that. But I think there was something about the kind of pandemic which enabled us to go, do you know what? We want to go out and be a good neighbour, either as individuals or as local churches. We want to go out and to serve our community. But we all thought that was very much a short-term thing. It's going to be just, what was the initial announcement? 12 weeks to flatten the curve. We all thought we could do something intensely for 12 weeks, and then we kind of go, it's gone on for a lot longer than that. And Gareth, I'm sure like me, you've been in meetings with other ministry leaders and church leaders who've basically said that we've got to a point where we're now all just that little bit, to coin a phrase, knackered.
Absolutely. And I think the effects of that are still going on. And I think, we've seen how, we've seen it within the context of the local church. We've seen it in the context of charities, that are currently now, struggling, to be honest. I mean, most of the people I talk to in the church and charity sector are struggling because of the impact that it had, being so full on during COVID and now coming out of it, and then seeing a bigger crisis in some ways. What we're seeing now is actually a larger crisis, I think. And going, what can we do and how can we do that? Which I think, again, comes back, obviously, to the fact that we need this to be a spirit-fueled response, not an adrenaline-filled response. And we need to, really be on our knees, effectively. We need to be looking upwards as well as looking around and making sure that we're just really in tune with what God's saying about our communities and what God's saying about our churches and where we go. I think the biggest thing for me, and it's interesting in terms of responding to the talk I was asked to give at Churches Together in England. My impulse was to give out lots of solutions and lots of project ideas. And obviously Cinnamon has got lots of project ideas and lots of people involved with us in amazing projects. But actually the first thing was are we rooted? Are we really in our communities for the long haul? Because again, people have gone through COVID and actually just survived in some ways. And I praise God for that. I praise God that they've survived and they've stayed local, they've stayed rooted. And I think that for me is the current number one response. Are we actually rooted in our communities? Are we going to stay? Are we going to be long term? When we've seen such a flux, my church, I'm sure yours and people that have lost lots of people. They've also gained lots of people, which is great. But it's been a flux, hasn't it? It's been a time of, of real change. So again, coming out of that, needing to stay rooted in the midst of our communities is so important. So it's a challenging time, but I think it's also a hopeful time for moving forward. But we are tired. I think I'll use that word. We're tired, but we're hopeful for what God's going to do. But we're keeping watchful around for the crises that we're now dealing with.
A couple of things I want to just ask you in relation to what you've just said, because all of that was fantastic. I think part of the piece for us now, as we look to the cost of living crisis, again, I think sometimes when we look at our media, we can become very knee-jerky and to what we think we need to do. But actually, that being rootedness is the priority first. I've just recorded, and it'll be out in September, some material for Premier Christian Radio, because in September they're having a focus on praying for streets and communities. And as I say, as the person at Premier that approached me said, who better to come and help us to speak into that? And one of the things that I was asked to do is actually just share my own story, because again, it's a bit like Adam as the UK director of Neighbourhood Prayer Network, it's easy for you to go and encourage other people, maybe not necessarily tell, but go and encourage other people to go and do some stuff, to share some ideas, to have conversations like we're having today, Gareth. But actually, what's your story? And I talked about the fact that, for me, in the last 6 weeks, we've just moved into a new community. So we were in 10 years in the village, just about a mile or so from where we are now. We've just moved into this new community. I'm privileged to be able to be based in the church office of the Baptist Church in this community. And as I was sharing my story, I said, do you know what? I just need to ask God to give me his heart for the community of which I'm now a part. Not the community that I was in there, but actually the community for where I am now. Because quite often, I don't know what you'd say to this, Gareth, but actually so often we see our Jerusalems, Judeas, Samarias as being the places where we work and other things like that, that actually sometimes we forget the rootedness of our own community. And actually we do need to ask God to break our heart for that community, give us his eyes for that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I think rootedness, obviously, being planted, being in a place means obviously, you talked about you've obviously moved home recently. Moving home is a very stressful thing. I know that. And building a house, if you're building a house, is a very stressful thing. But we're obviously actually called to make homes, aren't we? We're called, again, going back to Jeremiah and the prophet in Jeremiah 29, you think he calls us to build homes and plant gardens and make families. And building homes, we all seek to build a home, build a family, build a place that feels like home, and I see new builds go up here all the time. This community that I'm in is changing constantly. It's a very transient community. People come in and come out quite quickly. And even though I've been here 22, 23 years, I've seen such significant change. Often it's quite hard to feel rooted because you see so much change around you. But actually that position of actually being there and being always watchful, always seeking to the shalom of the city, always praying for the welfare of the city, but also at the same time, obviously, just being aware of those changes, being aware of communities that come and communities that go, being aware of the needs, being aware of what we see, being aware of the assets as well, being aware of the people that come who've got something to offer and something to bring, because everyone has something to offer and something to bring. So I think for me, community work is always, keeping our feet sort of firmly in the rootedness of God and the rootedness of prayer, but actually being responsive to the change and responsive to what's going on around us. So even though I've been, like you said, I'm not planning to move, I'm not planning to go anywhere at the moment unless God says, this is my rooted place, there's a lot of change going on around me, and staying rooted is really important for me.
I think my wife summed it up best when we finished. It was kind of a double move for us because it was a move into a new office, because I've been working from home for a number of years before the pandemic as well as during the pandemic. So we've moved into here, and that took a lot longer than anticipated. And then we had to move into the house a couple of doors down from the church. And again, the day we undid the last box, or we started to feel, well, I just say there's probably more boxes if I'm truthfully honest. When we started to have the box that meant that we could start to function, kind of breathing that sigh of relief and saying, not for another however long, not until God says he wants us to move somewhere else. So that importance of rootedness really resonates. But one of the words that you used when you chatted to CTE, Gareth, was actually the word of faithfulness in our communities. Faithfulness in our communities. I just wondered whether you would just be up for unpacking a little bit about not just the rootedness, but also the being faithful and what that means.
Yeah, I sort of illustrate, I don't know if this is the story you're thinking of, but I was illustrating it with a story, a recent story, that when my father-in-law preached in a small brethren chapel just around the corner from us. And in that meeting, sadly, a person came to rob somebody and took a purse and took some bank cards and credit cards and went off, and then started to try and withdraw some money from the bank, the local bank branch around the corner. And the local bank branch knew exactly who the person was on the card. They knew, this person was not the person trying to withdraw money. And they knew because of local knowledge. They knew because they knew that person. That local bank branch knew that person. I was illustrating in that story the fact that obviously most of the banks that I know in my local high street are shutting, they're closing. They are disappearing, and they're taking cash machines with them, and they're having nice, big, flashy branches in the city centres of Birmingham and elsewhere, but they're not in the neighbourhoods. They've moved away from the neighbourhoods, and it's meaning that some of my local residents and local friends have to find cash machines that charge them money, and I feel that's an injustice that we need to sort out, but it's another issue for another time. But
I share your same passion. I had a wry smile, Gareth, when you shared that at CTE, because I do think that whole thing about, back in the days when people were able to have the cash points, the post offices in their local villages, and now those things are disappearing, and so people are having to travel. There isn't that route of connections. So I do think there's a kind of campaign there, Gareth, that you and I need to go and fight together.
But I think it's just the illustration, I think, of that faithful presence. You are faithfully there, you stay there, you stick around, regardless of what the situation is. I mean, I know obviously banks are moving partly because of profit, partly because of shareholders, etc. And we've got lots of external pressures on us as local churches to remain in our communities. Things like financial pressures, things like, obviously, we have lost people and we've lost members, and it feels like, but we've got to stay rooted and faithful and be faithfully present, regardless of what those external circumstances are. So I think for me, that was the number one thing to the cost of living crisis, because if the church isn't rooted in neighbourhoods and people can't get to the places where they can connect with the local church and connect with those compassionate communities, then we're not going to be able to respond. So I think being faithful and being faithfully present and focusing on that, because I'm very much, I'm a church leader, but my heart is very much mission. My heart is a missional heart, and obviously when you use the word maintenance, that can be a little bit like, no, we're not into maintenance, we're into mission. But actually maintaining that presence at the moment in the midst of the challenges going on is just so important. And I think we've got to applaud those churches that have stayed rooted in their communities and have stayed faithful despite the challenges, but also help support that local expression and make sure that people do need something on their doorstep. We need something that they can actually connect to and relate to in their neighbourhoods. And that's for I'm in an urban community, but I'm sure that's the same. In fact, probably even more so for rural communities.
Very much so. Now, Gareth, you and I are both church leaders, so we can be honest. And maybe this is important sometimes, because I think sometimes people who kind of watch church leaders go, what kind of conversations do church leaders have? So as a church leader, I remember being told back in the day, when I was training and getting involved in local church leadership, and again, it may well be the same for yourself, that actually the important thing was our own local church preservation. Our own local church preservation is about maintaining those who come to us. And actually, I think the thing that the pandemic has taught us, and actually the cost of living crisis is going to cause us to continue, is actually maybe we need to drop the kind of empire stuff that sometimes exists, where we're going, we just need to encourage Christians in their communities to be the Christians in those communities, not trying to encourage, not trying to push people to come to our particular brand of Christianity or our particular church, but actually just to empower people. So as a fellow church leader, Gareth, because the NPN family will know, because I talk about it fairly regularly, but from your perspective, talk to us a bit about the importance of just being faithful and uniting with other Christians in the communities of which we're a part, even if they don't go to necessarily the same church as us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've very much seen that here. When I think it was 13, 14 years ago, I worked with another church, an Anglican church, very different style, very different brand. Let's put it like that, if you put it like as brand to us. But obviously have this same common desire to see us serve our community. And we knew that we couldn't do that as churches on our own. We are in a place where sadly churches are declining. We are in a place in a city area where church in the last 10, 15, 20 years has seen some quite significant decline. And we've seen, particularly in some of the established denominations, parishes merge or close altogether. So the need for each other is there. And I think in some ways that's made it a little bit easier, because we need each other. We can't do this on our own. We need to work with others. We can't maintain the work that we're doing just as a sole church. So I think the first thing to do is obviously, look around. A part of your looking around is looking for those other people. That could be people of peace, people of other faiths, people that you connect with naturally. to see how can we serve the community together and be a witness in the midst of that as well, you know, to be the salt and light of Christ in the midst of working with others. Because I think that's really important. I think we just don't do community work on our own. We do community work with others. And I think that's a really important principle as a church. You know, we are a place where we can, maybe if we have buildings, we gather people together and we can be a resource and use our resource, but we've got to always look outward. And I think, in terms of the church family, we've got to see each other as family. You know, we've got to see each other as people, even if we do have different styles. You know, within our own church, there are people that love different styles. You know, a few Sundays ago at 10 o'clock, I was in a communion service in a Brethren church that we help support and connect with, and it's a very quite a contemplative meeting, quite a chance just to be quiet and still, to sing some old hymns, to take communion together, and it was a powerful meeting. The next meeting, an hour later, I was in a pretty much Pentecostal meeting with huge amounts of loudness and singing, and we're a mainly African congregation. We're probably African majority in terms of our congregation in Smethwick, and it's a very different brand in that sense, but it's a wonderful brand, and we're together. And I don't feel like I'm going from one style to another, but I'm with the people, the family of God, and the family of God need to come together. And we will have disagreements about styles and brands, but actually what we do agree with is we need to love our neighbour. And I think loving our neighbour is one of those unifying things, actually, that we need to be connected into.
Just as you were saying that scripture, very familiar scripture going on in my head, Psalm 133:1. When brothers and sisters dwell together in unity, there the Lord commands his blessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And therefore that is about putting down our style, our preferences, simply to be a good neighbour, working with those that we may not necessarily normally would work with, but actually for the sake of needing to serve our communities in this cost of living crisis, that's really important. We were talking before we hit the record button, Gareth, about the fact that, again, something that we just need to be honest about when it comes to the kind of cost of living crisis, because, as the church, we need to be having this conversation. And that's why I'm really glad that Gareth and others are helping support other ministries and helping support the church at large, have this conversation about how do we respond to the cost of living crisis? Are we aware of the needs? Neighbourhood Prayer Network is going to be looking at how it can work with Cinnamon and others over the course of the coming weeks and months, because it isn't, as Gareth said, just a short-term thing. But I think sometimes as Christians, we can kind of get ourselves into the thought process that goes, it's those out there, the loneliness that exists, those that are, the stat from Age UK that say that 1 in 5 older people say the pet or the television is their closest form of company. And now, because of the cost of living crisis, because of the cost of electricity, not being able to have the TV, we sometimes have the belief that it kind of goes on out there, and Neighbourhood Prayer Network in September is launching a resource to help bring some light and bring some light to some of the harsh statistics that exist around the cost of living crisis. So NPN family, keep a watch out for that in September. I've seen the draft of it, and it's going to be brilliant. And it will really encourage you and certainly mobilize you to pray and to act when it comes out. But actually, Gareth, coming back, that recognition sometimes that actually as Christians, we need to also be a little bit more authentic and a little bit real and actually say, do you know what? We're facing the cost of living crisis in different ways, and therefore that gives greater authenticity to our witness, both as a church but also as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. It's our job, obviously, as church leaders and also as Cinnamon as well, to work alongside churches. We're always alongside people, aren't we? When you're working alongside someone, you're listening to that conversation. I know that we did a sort of work party here on Saturday as church, and often when you're working together and doing something in the garden and being together, often you start to have those conversations. You listen probably a little bit more intently sometimes when you're working, just it's affecting everybody. There's no doubt about that. The cost of living crisis is affecting it. We're all having to make some very difficult and challenging choices. I suppose the biggest challenge for me is those that actually don't have a choice. I think that's the one that that's the group of people I'm really concerned about. I think this cost of living crisis has come to a place where, a bit like COVID, COVID was called the Great Leveller. Well, it actually wasn't. I know everyone could get COVID. I know the Queen and the Prime Minister caught COVID, and the poor caught COVID, etc. But actually, it wasn't a great leveller, because I know and experienced it here that people working in the care sector, working in supermarkets, particularly early on in the pandemic, didn't have the equipment, were more vulnerable to COVID. And the Black minority ethnic community definitely were more susceptible, and in my community here, we are predominantly we're a community of a variety of nations, and I saw that firsthand, and it wasn't a great level. So I was very fed up of hearing the term the great level, because it wasn't. And I think the cost of living crisis, yes, it affects everybody, and we will have to make choices, but our choices will be quite different. The choice that I might make to save a bit of money here or save a bit of money there, go and visit Martin Lewis's website and check out what I can do and what I can't do, versus actually the choice of I can't pay the rent, I can't feed my family, I can't put the heating on. They're very stark. In fact, they're not choices at all, are they? So I do think this is going to be, we need to listen out for those conversations and listen out for those places where we do see, whether that's in our food banks, whether that's in our regular sort of coffee mornings, drop-ins. We need to listen out for those conversations. And I think also we will need to think about how we respond. The next wave of this, we're in a wave of different sort of crises and different points. There is another wave coming, of course, with the October hike in energy prices. Obviously, even in the news today, we've got gas prices going up in Europe. That has a knock-on on us. Then actually, we're going to come to that point, and we're going to have to think seriously, how do we respond? How do we do something different, potentially, because the crisis is going to get worse before it gets better. And as I said earlier, it's going to be a long-term thing. So we've got to be listening. We've got to always be hearing for those conversations. Yes, support everybody, support as many as we can in their challenging choices. But some people are going to have no choice, and we've got to really get alongside those people.
We're coming to the last couple of minutes of our conversation, and we could talk for hours on this stuff. And Gareth, I hope that, as you say, because this is coming in waves, we're getting ready. People are experiencing the cost of living crisis now. We're going to see the next wave in the autumn, when we see exactly what happens. We're awaiting a new prime minister who is, as we speak, the two candidates are going round the nation talking about how they can respond to what's going on. And it's interesting, if you watch both candidates, they're both saying the line ... we'll have to wait and see. And so, decisions are going to be made in the light of that then will impact what happens next. And so this kind of conversation needs to go on, needs to continue to go on. And I hope, Gareth, you'll be obliging when I drop you another email in a little while's time and saying, can we continue the conversation and just take stock of where we are at that point? But the other word that you used as we come into to end our conversation, and I'd love you just to encourage us with this, one of the words that you used when you were talking to CTE was about the importance of being hopeful. Importance of being hopeful. I think if we look at our newspapers, if we look at what's going on around us, it's really easy to become quite despairing. But actually, what's the role of the church and individual Christians in terms of being that hopeful presence in their communities, even in the midst of a cost of living crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's our primary purpose at the moment. We need to remain hopeful and prayerful. I mean, that is absolutely fundamental. I think, again, just thinking about just what we was doing last Saturday here in church and being together, just about 20 of us together as a community of people, actually changing a sort of derelict garden space into a garden space that we hope the whole community will come and use and be a space where people can both just contemplate and think and have some quiet. We can also use it for food and barbecues. We're making sure we're building the brick-built barbecue, and we're doing all that stuff that we need to do to make sure that people come and connect. And I think just that sense of, just being together and being community in the midst of this. The church is a place that brings, we're a very diverse church, which I celebrate, because we're bringing all these different people together with different skills, with different assets and abilities, which is brilliant, because then actually again, it's going about looking around and looking at what's around us. Then we've got the basis to then build something that is hopeful for people. We've just at the moment got a little garage just that we've just at this stage we're able to just give that away, and we've given it to someone who's just doing some woodwork and some building some really nice bits of furniture. And it's just those little glimpses of hope. It's giving hope to them, to that person, giving hope to other volunteers that are working with them. It's those glimpses of hope that help us, to be honest, as church leaders, because we need those glimpses of hope. but it's also making sure that that glimpse of hope that we're getting is obviously that bigger hope as well. And I know I talked, I think, a little bit about what the Bible Society called that hope of the far horizon in the Bible course, which I just think is a wonderful expression. The far horizon is, of course, a time when there is no more tears, that time when, with resurrected bodies, we are, we're released, we're free from all the bad news. But as people right now, we've got a hope of the near horizon to bring to people. And the hope of that near horizon is providing those little glimpses sometimes of people just being together, connecting together. We need that opportunity just to love and be with each other. As I said, a lot of our job, a lot of our work is about providing projects, which are really, really necessary. But the first fundamental thing is to be community and to listen to one another and then to respond. And obviously within that, making sure it's a prayerful community. I'm not just saying that because of the NPN family, but making sure as church that we are a prayerful and hopeful community. So yeah, I think there's good times ahead. I feel at the moment, in terms of my own local church leadership role, I feel that at the moment I'm allowed to be a little bit more experimental than I've ever been before. I mean, some of that experimental stuff is about the fact that we have hit a bit of a bottom, sort of rock bottom, in terms of church attendance, in terms of church life, perhaps. But actually, and we need new solutions and new ways forward. We don't want to go back. But actually, some of those new solutions, why weren't we doing that years ago? Do you know what I mean? And I think one of the things I know is happening, I know churches are thinking about, is opening up their churches basically as lounges in the autumn for those that won't be able to pay their bills. Well, shouldn't the church be a lounge? The church is not always a Sunday gathering, of course. What a great opportunity for the church to be the living room, the kitchen, the dining room. It's not a nice place to be. We don't want people to have to do that. But if that's what's going to happen, then what a great opportunity for the church to be the living room, the dining room, the home, and the heat and the warmth in the midst of this crisis. And I hope that doesn't carry on. I hope we don't have to have effectively room banks, which is what in fact I think Martin Lewis has talked about that. That should not exist. That should not happen. Like food banks shouldn't happen. But in the midst of that, should we be thinking about actually how can we be a home? How can we be that community? How can we be that dining room, that food, that table for people moving forward? And I think, we've got this chance of being hopeful with our ability to be a bit experimental. We've got nothing to lose. We can do things differently. We should be doing things differently and thinking, what is God saying about our current situation as local churches?
I love that piece about the fact that, to be hopeful means that we need to be experimental, actually, to go, do you know what? People will see our love. What's the old phrase? It doesn't matter how much you pretend to love until you genuinely love. It doesn't matter how much you try to pretend until you genuinely love. And actually, when people see us going out of our way to be intentional, I love the old Zig Ziglar quote, the American Bible teacher, that says, small things done consistently creates a massive change. And I think sometimes, NPN family will be very much aware, Gareth, you may not be, but the NPN family very much aware of how saying, we've just got to be doing the small stuff. Sometimes as Christians, we can be we can be at that place where we think we've got to do the big stuff, and we become the small bit becomes inadequate. But actually, in this kind of cost of living crisis, let's be experimental. Let's start small. Let's see what God does from that place of prayer, when we ask the Holy Spirit to come and use us for his kingdom, for bringing relief to others, for being that good neighbor. Then God does indeed show up. It's very interesting. We've just had the heat wave in the last couple of weeks, and I saw lots of social media posts saying, "Come on, our church is open to come in during the heat wave." But I think it's interesting from what you shared there, Gareth, about churches in the autumn opening themselves up to become the living room and the kitchen for people who aren't able to do that at home. So NPN family, let me encourage you to go and find out more information about that. Gareth, is there anywhere that people can go and find out about that kind of thing that's going on to help signpost somebody that goes, I really love that idea, but I'd love to find out just that little bit more, because that kind of idea really resonates?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of things I would recommend you to think about and look at. And obviously, this is my work with Cinnamon Network. I mean, one of the things we want to do is make sure we connect with each other. So we connect some of those experiments together, and we get to hear the stories of what people are doing in their community. So we've built a website called cinnamonconnect.org. cinemanconnect.co.uk, not Cinnamon Network, cinemanconnect.co.uk. And there is both a free service. There is also a paid for service that's £10 a month, but the free service gives you access to lots of resources, lots of ideas, lots of inspiration, lots of short talks, and to connect to each other, which I think is this next step. We need to be connecting to one another. We don't pretend to be the experts in everything. We can't be the experts in everything. That's, Cinnamon Network, Neighbourhood Prayer Network, we're not the experts in everything, but we connect people together and we learn from each other. And the idea of that being that sort of learning community and find people that are going through similar things, because again, every church is different. Every church situation is unique, actually. But there'll be things within that uniqueness that actually be going, oh yeah, that church is going through this. I need to connect with them. So cinemanconnect.co.uk would be my first port of call. I think in terms of projects, we do on the Cinnamon Network website, there's obviously a list of, I think it's now 41 tried and tested projects that work across the UK. Now, again, please, I'm saying to churches, don't run all 41. Please don't go on that and just pick out all 41 and go, yeah, we can do all these things. But do look there for ideas and inspiration yourself. There might be a local expression of what you can do through what others are doing. But also, just have a look on that website and watch some of the videos and see how people are responding to a variety of crises. That can be responses to the cost of living, but also responses particularly around mental health and loneliness and isolation, which I think are probably, in fact, in some way, the tsunami that we've had from the COVID is mental health, loneliness and isolation. So again, some of the things that are being dealt with there. And keep in contact, keep in touch. We've got some work going on around those particular issues come the autumn, working with people like Linking Lives, Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries, and actually also about our own mental health as church leaders. Actually, are we looking after ourselves? We'll be doing some stuff around that as well. So have a look on those websites, cinemanconnect.co.uk, excuse me, and cinnamonnetwork.co.uk for the project ideas.
Brilliant. And I think for us NPN family, it's about just simply, as Gareth says, going and finding the thing that works for you. What is God stirring you to do? And then be rooted and be faithful. Be rooted and be faithful. But principally, let's be those ambassadors of hope. So much that we could continue to talk about, but we've spent a good chunk of time together this today, Gareth, having this conversation, and I hope we can continue to connect, because I think there's some really important work that's done, and these conversations need to continue to be had. And so Neighbourhood Prayer Network very much committing ourselves to where we see other ministries doing some amazing stuff, are having the conversation, signposting and directing you to, because we want you to do what God is stirring you to do. But sometimes you need some encouragement and some help and some input. And I know that Cinnamon is one of those great organizations that seeks to do that. But I love the fact, Gareth, that you do that, not because you're telling people what to do, but because you're living it out in your own local community. You're helping model it out as a leader. You're encouraging those within the life of the church, of which you are a part, but you're encouraging us to be kingdom, principally, as we seek the shalom of our city, our town, our village, wherever it is that God places us. So, friends, let me encourage you to go and check out the work of Cinnamon Networks and Cinnamon Connects, two great websites to go and find out. If you want connecting with Gareth or anybody within the Cinnamon Network team that you think, actually, some of that stuff I'd love to just chat a bit more about because I'm a leader or I've got some ideas, then these are the times when we need to have that conversation. So get in touch with us, and Neighbourhood Prayer Network will be very happy, as we always do with any of the people that we speak to, point you in the right direction if that is helpful. Gareth, thank you so much indeed for spending the time talking today. I look forward to connecting up with you very, very soon. But just before we go, what can we pray for you, particularly you personally, as we go into this next season?
Yeah, and I think I will say pray for me personally, but I think also, I think all church leaders at this particular time who have been, as you said, you used the words being very tired, and I think we are very, very tired. We are very in need of refreshing, I think, for the season ahead. So I think, pray for refreshment. I mean, many of us might be thinking of holidays at the moment, and maybe thinking about, going away for a few weeks or whatever. I think we do need to be refreshed and restored for what is ahead. And as I said, we don't want to be adrenaline fueled. We want to be spirit fueled for the work ahead. So to be spirit fueled, I think would be my prayer for the time ahead.
Brilliant. Well, we will pray for you that you are not just adrenaline fuel, but you actually go and take that rest, because I think it is going to be really important for us to take that rest over the course of the summer. And that's why we wanted to put this in as part of our summer content for Neighbourhood Prayer Network, because this is the kind of stuff that we might have more space than we otherwise would, because we are taking some time out. We don't want people to kind of be spending their time constantly looking and searching, but if this conversation is helpful as you just take space to reflect and to pray, get ready for the season ahead, because it is going to be an intense season. But Gareth, looking forward to connecting with you, hopefully before not too very long. But NPN family, it is always a delight and a privilege to sit down with friends and ministry leaders from other networks and talk to them about what's going on. So I pray you found this conversation helpful. But friends, until next time, may God bless you.